Hey guys, JLB Zombie here and welcome back to another video. In this video I'm going to be breaking down my favourite portrayals of the character Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. There are 8 to choose from. We're going to be going from my least favourite to my favourite. Let's not waste any time, let's get the ranking done. The worst portrayal of Leatherface in my opinion is Jackson from the 2017 film Leatherface. Now, okay, I guess you could say he doesn't really become Leatherface until the last few seconds of the movie. Well, okay, but this Leatherface is meant to be Gunnar Hansen's version of Leatherface, and to me, I just cannot see him in that role. I find it very difficult to believe that this character, Jackson, grew up to be Gunnar Hansen's version of Leatherface from Tobe Hooper's original movie. Jackson, in the movie, when we meet him, he's helpful, he's charming, and he doesn't come across as a person who was raised to be a butcher. I think Bud would have been a better choice for the character. He was a silent character, he was very suspicious because he didn't say anything, and on top of everything else, he had the right build. There's a scene in the trailer where he's kept in the shadows. It has to be Leatherface. But of course, that's not the case here. Also, during an intense chase sequence, Jackson gets his face shot, which then causes him to have a gaping wound in his cheek. And then when he arrives home, his mother Verna stitches up his face. So now we are given a reason as to why he wears his victims' faces. Whereas in the original movie, we don't know why Leatherface wore his victims' faces. We don't know why he has a split personality disorder. This is what made Gunnar Hansen's version of Leatherface so scary. We knew nothing about him. So that's why I've put Jackson at number 8. It just seems very odd to me. Now for the longest time, this version of Leatherface used to be at my number 8 spot. This was the version that I hated the most, but until watching Leatherface a couple of times, it's dropped down just by 1. And it's the Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation. The portrayal of Leatherface in this movie is so bad. I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation is not a good movie whatsoever. Leatherface in this movie doesn't even kill one single person with his chainsaw. I mean, come on, the movie is called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. How can you have a movie with Leatherface in it not killing anyone with a chainsaw? It doesn't make any sense. Vilma gets most of the kills in this movie. Leatherface has 1 kill and that was with a sledgehammer. This movie is not called The Texas Sledgehammer Massacre. It just doesn't sound right. Leatherface in this movie spends the majority of his time screaming and wailing, and it's just so annoying. When Jenny tells him to sit down and shut up, I just felt like saying, thank you. Next Generation is the worst film in the franchise, and Leatherface, to put it briefly, is just a whiny bitch. So with all that said, coming in at number 6 is Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. When making the sequel, Tobe Hooper knew he couldn't top the original. So he took a completely different approach and added some humour to the movie. Leatherface in this film is played by Bill Johnson, and he really isn't scary or threatening. That's how I feel anyway. In fact, he's in love. Leatherface shares scenes with a radio DJ named Stretch, and the most infamous scene is when he practically dry humps her with his chainsaw. Yeah. And yes, Leatherface even has a, how shall I put this, climax. Let's not forget that when frustrated, he does this strange sort of chainsaw wiggle dance, which I guess has become iconic. I kind of like the look of the skin mask with the different skin tones and beard, and that being said, I'm absolutely certain that Leatherface died at the end of this movie. Beginning the top 5 is Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw 3D. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this version. For me, Leatherface in this movie isn't intimidating as I feel he should be, and really doesn't feel like Gunnar Hansen's version of Leatherface. I will keep saying that a lot in this video. He could have had an awesome scene at the carnival and slaughtered all those people, but instead he decided to go specifically after Heather. This movie really doesn't make you see Leatherface as a true villain. Instead, the locals who burned down the Sawyer house are meant to be the real villains, because there's a sequence in the movie where we actually find out that Heather is related to Leatherface, and by the end of the movie, she becomes his caretaker. The only thing I like about this version of Leatherface is that he actually sews a victim's face onto his own. But the moment he takes it off, it's fresh, and a few scenes later, the same skin mask is all dirty and old looking. What? And please don't get me started on the timeline of this film. It's all over the place. Coming in at number 4 is the most recent version of Leatherface, played by Mark Burnham. Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Leatherface feels a lot more like Gunnar Hansen's Leatherface. His build and posture is good and resembles Gunnar Hansen a lot more than Dan Yeager from Texas Chainsaw 3D. Now, unfortunately, I do not like the look of Leatherface from this film. His mask is a total mess, it's just covered in blood, you cannot make it out. It's one of my least favourite skin masks in the entire franchise. But this version of Leatherface has some solid kills. He's aggressive, that was clearly shown during the scene in the police van. He has a great and gruesome massacre scene on the tour bus, as we all saw in the trailer, and I like that he still uses the same chainsaw from 1974. It's just a shame that the movie kind of sucked. I hear that another movie is in the works, so let's hope that it's much better than this current entry in the franchise. So there is only 3 versions of Leatherface left to rank, and from this point forward I love all portrayals of Leatherface. So let's slash our way at number 3. Now, I'm very fond of Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3. In fact, it's one of my favourite films in the franchise. I love the overall look of Leatherface, from the skin mask to his rotten teeth, and the fact that Leatherface now has grown long hair. Which makes sense because Part 3 is a direct sequel to the original movie and ignores Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. So, from the first movie to the third movie, Leatherface has obviously aged and has been in hiding. I like that the family gave him his own personalised chainsaw because, as we all know, his chainsaw is his favourite toy. I love that Leatherface in this movie in a couple of scenes is childlike, much like Leatherface from the original movie. There I go again. I'm not crazy about the family in this movie. I don't think they bring anything remotely new to the film. I much prefer the family from the original movie, Texas Chainsaw Part 2, and the family from Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Beginning and the 2003 remake. Overall, R.A. Mihailoff is a fantastic Leatherface and one of my all-time favourites. By this point, you know who my favourite portrayal of Leatherface is. In fact, you might have guessed that halfway through the video. So, coming in at number 2 is Andrew Brunonsky's portrayal of Leatherface from the 2003 remake and Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Beginning. In shorter terms, both of these versions of Leatherface I would definitely fear the most if I was confronted with him. Brunonsky plays Leatherface in both movies with brutal force and total terror. He's nothing but a monster. He was born a butcher and raised to kill. I love the look of Leatherface in both movies, especially in the 2003 remake. The skin mask is great. I love every detail down to the stitches and the missing chunk of hair. Leatherface has so many standout scenes in this movie, and each scene is just full of suspense and heart-pounding terror. Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Beginning is much more brutal and an imposing threat, much like the 2003 remake. Each scene that features Leatherface is a heart-pumping scene. In this timeline, this is the first time that Leatherface has ever picked up a chainsaw, and when he makes his first kill, it's definitely not forgettable. It's also the first time he wears a skin mask, and again the scene is unforgettable, but most of all, disturbing. Also, the way Andrew Brunonsky runs with the chainsaw as Leatherface is just absolutely terrifying. And for all those reasons, this is why Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Remake and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Beginning is my second favourite version of Leatherface. Which of course means that the late great Gunnar Hansen is my all-time favourite portrayal of the character Leatherface. What can I say about this version of Leatherface that hasn't already been said? Nobody had ever seen a character like this before. Gunnar Hansen's portrayal as Leatherface is such a brutal force. When all these unexpected people begin to appear out of nowhere in his house, Leatherface doesn't know what to do. His only solution is to dispose of them. Leatherface takes many appearances in the 1974 movie, from the Pretty Woman outfit to the Old Lady outfit, and of course the iconic Killing Mask appearance, which is my favourite out of all 3 appearances, second only to the Pretty Woman appearance. There are so many sequences in this film where I think Leatherface is the most terrifying. The first is when we see Leatherface standing in the doorway as Kirk trips over. The audience doesn't have time to process who this figure is, because by that time we are in shock as Kirk is slammed over the head with a mallet. Secondly, when Pam goes to find Kirk in the farmhouse, after seeing horrible sights of bones and bone furniture, she is horrified and attempts to run. When Leatherface appears from behind the steel door, they both scream at the sight of one another. Pam almost makes it out, but Leatherface catches her and you know what happens next. What makes this most frightening is that Pam almost escapes. She actually gets outside, but Leatherface was right behind her. The other scene that is terrifying is when Jerry finds Pam in the freezer after coming off of the meat hook. What's even more terrifying is that she's still alive. He's startled as she quivers and flops out of the freezer. Then from out of nowhere, Leatherface appears from behind Jerry in the doorway and screams, and Jerry screams in terror, as he should, as Leatherface slams him in the head with a mallet. Another scene is when Sally and Franklin are looking out for Jerry in the woods. The only thing they have is a flashlight. Franklin hears a noise, tells Sally to stop. When he turns the flashlight in another direction, Leatherface again appears from the darkness wielding his chainsaw and kills Franklin. It's such a fantastic jump scare. The next scene that I'm going to mention is much more subtle than the others that I have mentioned, but it's just as terrifying. Sally is screaming for her dear life, begging them to stop, when Leatherface slowly arises from the table, gets out of his chair, and at this point he's wearing his Pretty Woman outfit. Without making a single sound, he slowly creeps towards Sally. It is just a creepy moment. And finally, the final sequence where Leatherface is terrifying is the final chase sequence. Sally escapes in the back of a pickup truck as she's now being driven to the edge and drifted into madness. Leatherface violently swings his chainsaw below the hot beaming orange sun, and then silence. End of movie. So guys, that wraps up my favourite portrayals of Leatherface and least favourite portrayals of Leatherface. But most importantly, who's your favourite version of Leatherface? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway guys, that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video, and as always, take care.